Government can be brought to heel, and I think they can be forced to cough up to pay for pay equalisation to end pay discrimination now.
Deputy Tommy Broughan.
Thanks, Cian. I echo the comments of my colleagues. I think the report we got from the Parliamentary Budget Office, Minister, in relation to the 190 million, it showed that the adjustments, for example, would be something around 80 million for health, I think around the same for education, 12 million for justice and 4 million for the local authorities. So, for a relatively small measure, I suppose, in the context of the total budget, we could begin to address this problem. Can I just return again, though, to the last delegation I met, which were representing the hospital consultants. I mean, they did make, I think, a powerful case by saying that the people after 2011, they had a 57% cut in salary and then 25% difference, I think, over 9 years, even with some of the more recent changes. And in the whole country, for example, the example I was given, well, first of all, to compare us with countries like Sweden and Norway, the level of consultants per capita, Ireland comes out in a very adverse way when we make those kind of comparisons. And, for example, you didn't mention anything about the acute beds in your budget speech or the kind of staffing led by consultant doctors that we would need to have. And in the whole country, we've something like only, I think it's 9 paediatric emergency consultants when the profession and the whole health sector estimates we need something like 30. We're spending something like 114 million a year on agency doctors when it would only cost maybe 20 million to introduce pay equality. So, you do seem to have your priorities wrong in this area, Minister, and if we want to have a vibrant, well-led health sector, for example, you need to expedite this process over the next year or so.
Health service. We have a health service that, despite many of the difficulties that it faces every day, in its A&Es, through its frontline workers, we have a health service that by and large delivers better health outcomes for our citizens, that when our citizens get into the system, due to the efforts of our staff and the resourcing and support that they get, our citizens get the care and the focus that they need and deserve. So we do have a system that is capable of responding back to the needs of our citizens and to their health needs. If I go to each of the points that have been put in turn to me, if I begin with what Deputy Troy has said, there is a process underway. The process that is underway involves votes being cast and then them being counted. I am being very clear about the proposition that we have negotiated with the Public Services Committee of the Irish Congress of Trade Unions. I believe it is a proposition that can make a difference to a large number of public servants quickly, while also meeting all of the other service needs that have been raised with me, even during this session here. Deputy Murphy, I stand by what I said to you. It's so notable you use the language of threats to government. What I'm interested in doing is trying to constructively engage with other stakeholders and reach agreements with our citizens that deliver outcomes for them, yes, in terms of their wages, but also in terms of trying to meet all of the other priorities that our country expects government to be able to respond back to. In terms of what Deputy O'Brien said, Deputy, from what you have said a moment ago, it does appear to me that you want this issue dealt with in a single year, across even a 2-year period. In fairness to Sinn Féin, what I will say is you have outlined ways in which tax could be raised to do this. But my contention back to you is those very kind of tax measures that you've outlined involve multiple tax increases and involve dealing with those sectors of our employment that create jobs. And at a time of such uncertainty, potentially due to Brexit, we need to ensure that policies are being implemented by government that can retain and create further jobs, as opposed to affecting them through the kind of tax raises that you're looking to bring forward. And actually, I'll deal with the point that you make in relation to banks. Actually, the consequences of what Sinn Féin are looking for in terms of our banking system, and I know we will be dealing with this during the finance bill, I've published a paper that deals with the consequences of treating our banking sector differently to other banks. And there are consequences to do that. There are consequences for consumers of those banks. There are consequences of for our economy who need credit for those banks, and there are consequences for a state that still owns a large chunk of those banks. And then just in relation to what Deputy Broughan has said there, I have acknowledged the issues that are there. I have acknowledged my determination to make progress in it. But Deputy, would you also acknowledge that since 2011, over 61,500 new entrants have joined our public services? They're nearly 19% of the total workforce. And in our efforts to treat them in the way I've described, we've put forward a proposition that I hope will be favourably considered. Thank you.